Hello, everyone. So I just had a long drive back from the Chicago area, and I tried it. I tried listening to the Rivers of Nile new song because they seem to be the flag bearer of the modern metal movement in terms of being the most progressive, the most challenging, having the most unique ideas. Of course, it's all very transparent, and none of that is actually true. And I don't want to spend this whole video talking about that song or that band, but it made me start thinking about the problem we have currently with the ability for the youth to produce good metal. And I'm sure if you were to ask Rivers of Nile, they probably wouldn't call themselves a metal band anymore because they have this air of pretentiousness where they most likely are thinking that they're bigger than what metal is. And upon listening to this song, it's obviously still metalcore. As much as they're going to try to dress it up with, now it's no longer a saxophone. Now it's a synth, a really goofy sounding synth that totally doesn't belong. But as much as they try to dress it up, it's still your pop song arrangement with your verse and your chorus, and it all leads to the breakdown. There's this nothingness in the middle that gives way to a guitar solo that doesn't feel like it belongs, and then the breakdown hits again and the song ends. So you have your formula set in stone. And as much as they try to come at you with the idea that this is something bigger, this is something new, this stands outside the box, it's still the same thing. And it makes me sad because when I was really immersing myself in metal for the first time, it was a common thing to look towards the newer bands to try to bring something to the table that would be exciting, because that vitality in youth really does produce some of the best metal. So I'm looking for it now because obviously we need some new blood to show us something unique, show us something that has some kind of artistic vision behind it, and something that is compositionally solid. And that's getting harder and harder to find. So we end up looking to the old guard to try to find something, and it's like, please God, Suffocation, don't shit the bed again. And then of course they do. And oh God, Dark Throne, please give us a record that has actual riffs, and then they don't. And we just keep falling further down that hole where we don't have anyone to look forward to producing a decent record for us. So I still keep giving these young bands a try. And this whole Rivers of Nile thing, there's parts that kind of it sounds like they're trying to give you a sense of being a little disturbing, and that's cool. Like, I definitely want music to make me feel something. I want the movies I watch to make me feel something. I want that sense of discomfort. I want to end the song thinking about the song, end a movie thinking about the movie. I want it to last. And with this, it just feels a bit artificial. It feels like the themes are really ham-fisted, and it feels like the band is attempting to kind of sound like a little bit like Daughters, and that's a band that came from like the MySpace core type of thing in the early 2000s, and I hated that shit then. Like that really spastic Dillinger Escape Plan stuff. Let Dillinger be Dillinger, let Meshuggah be Meshuggah. But Daughters actually kind of graduated from that and put out an actually good record a couple of years ago that is legitimately disturbing in ways, and that's great. Something that makes me feel something is great. So I think that bands that are plagued by the trends of certain core type of suffix whatever genres, they can extend out from it eventually. So I look to a band like Rivers of Nile and I think, well, maybe they can do it. But they're thinking that progression involves your orchestration. Before they were the band with the saxophone, and now they're the band with the synth. And if you ask people, what about this is unique? What about this is progressive? They'll tell you, oh, they have a sax. Oh, they have a synth. They don't tell you anything about the construction of the music, and people don't really know what progressive is because it's not really, it doesn't mean anything anymore anyway. But they'll think that anything that's outside the box of what metal is will make it progressive, when it really just kind of shines the light on the fact that these people were never really into metal to begin with. And the things that will make them stand out are going to be those non-metal things like a saxophone. That people are going to always cite that because the fans of this genre also don't really like what metal is. They like what metalcore is. They like what breakdowns are. They like what big choruses are. And, you know, it's that kind of mentality that is really going to plague these kind of bands. But why is the music written like that? And why are the left field type of ideas just resorting to gimmickry? Well, it's because youth nowadays is rooted in conformity. And it's a shame, because you need that healthy dose of fuck you to make good metal a lot of the time. But the youth of today does not have a healthy dose of fuck you. They have a healthy dose of stay in line, do what the public wants to hear, don't rock the boat. And if you look at, you know, I don't want to make this a political channel, I don't want to delve too much down that path, but if you look at who is standing outside the box, who is the nonconformist nowadays, it's usually older people. Whereas, you know, the youth of today are the kind of like the Karens of society, making sure everyone does the right thing or they're going to get tattled on. All that shit is fucking ridiculous, and that plagues the compositional mind, because you start thinking like, how can I make sure I'm still socially accepted? What formula do I need to stick to? Well, I need to have choruses, I need to have breakdowns, but I also need people to think that I'm deep. So how can I fake that? I know, let's bring in a left field instrument like a saxophone. It's all very transparent, and it really brings to mind the idea that there is not an underlying message to what they're trying to do. And that makes me sad, because if you look back on like classic metal bands in their heyday as youths, if you've seen the video of like Beharit in a shopping mall at 17 years old, shit like that's fucking bananas. You'll never see stuff like that now. You know, for the most part, if you're young now, you're going to look to the YouTube guitar players, you're going to look to the bands that are popular, and they're all going to be tinged by what metalcore is. There is no young metal today that essentially is not affected by metalcore. It's really a shame, but I mean, I guess like a band like Hammerhead, I've talked about them in the comment section of another video. That's like the only one. It's the only one that's got young kids that aren't playing metalcore, and they started doing kind of Meshuggah type of stuff recently instead of being like a Beneath the Remains type of band, which is surprising, a little disappointing, but they're not doing it in the typical way that all the metalcore bands are doing now. So it's really hard to come by bands that are young and are trying to do something with that sounds vital and outside the box, yet still fits within the metal parameters. And I'm all for being outside the box. I know that a lot of this channel will make it seem like this is not the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be like this, and it's not true. The way I look at it is, I want you to have an adventurous sense of melody that reveals who you are as a composer, who you are as a player, who you are as a person. And if I don't hear that from your music, if I don't hear that sense of melody that reveals you as a player, then I'll know that there isn't a sense of inspiration that is beyond just wanting to jump on the pile and make a name for yourself, pretty much stepping in someone else's path that's already been laid out for you. And that's what's happening with younger bands today. And I don't know how we're going to get out of it, because as much as these bands produce, get their name out there, like all of them, like your Inferi, all of that shit, if you look at these kids, you just see it, you see that they're metalcore kids, but they're somewhat a little bit graduated, and, you know, kind of still, they've gotten better at guitar, but it's still metalcore. You know, it's all still that same, make sure you get to the breakdown, make sure that your riffs are exercises so that you don't really have to think about putting together a unique melody in any kind of way. It's all the shopping list metal. It's all the Hal Leonard core, you know, that fucking book that you grab when you're trying to learn guitar for the first time. It's that shit, and then you generate riffs out of it, you generate songs out of it, and you generate an album out of it. And people will look to it and think that it's great and think that it's somewhat unique because it sounds busy, but it's not. And I don't know what it's going to take to get the youth out of that rut. From what I'm hearing, the upcoming generation afterwards is more rebellious, which is what we need. Like I've said before on previous videos, I don't like the idea of metal needing to be part of counterculture, because counterculture to me indicates that you're being controlled. Like, oh, this weight is pressing down on me. I'm gonna rebel and showcase something that will be represent something that's against what I'm being told right now. And I don't like the idea that there's a hand steering you, but unfortunately that's just kind of how a lot of art happens. You end up being forced into a box. You feel the despair from it and you lash out artistically. And there is no box right now that's pushing down on the young metal guitar player. Instead, there's this really comfy couch of everyone saying, hey, what you're doing is great as long as you're showing that you're good at your instrument, when the older metalheads like me know that doesn't fucking matter. But there's also that whole support your local scene mentality, which ended up really plaguing the idea of metal having to be good to be respected, and that's way out of control now. If you look at what kind of metal is plaguing the YouTube airwaves, it's all getting championed as the best shit in the world, and no one's really pinpointing how empty it is. And it's just a shame, because it was the job of the youths back in the day to say that shit is fucking lame and it's bullshit and it's transparent. But now kids can't see that, and it takes the adults to show it to them, which is fucking stupid and unbelievable, because by now the stuff that we as older people are looking to proclaim to the youth, we should be, essentially our perspective should be burnt out, and we should be being replaced by something that is more valid, because we're probably going to be losing that vitality to produce great records, as shown in like what Suffocation and shit is doing. But we still have a message to say, even though a lot of the older bands aren't proclaiming it musically, we still have the idea of what should drive us to play music, what should drive us to pick up our instruments in the first place. Whereas nowadays, I don't really think that drive is present in the young player. And I don't know how we're going to get away from it, because the way that people are viewing art now is they're viewing it as effort-based. They're not viewing it as message-based. It's the idea of, he put in the time, he got good at his instrument, so now he's great. And that's just really not the good way to look at what you're producing as being a valid art form. I mean, you can have the simplest shit in the world and still have it be more artistically valid than the busiest shit in the world if you have drive behind it and a vision and a message that is coherent. That speaks way more volumes than being able to play Circles Around Me on guitar but still not having anything to say with it. But people don't really grasp that, and that's something that's really harming a lot of what these younger bands are doing, because I think that if I'm sure these younger bands are reading the comment sections of every video that they post, and they're loving the idea that everyone is up their ass about what they're doing. But I'm sure if enough people were like, you know what, this is kind of disconnected, I'm not really feeling what you're trying to tell me with your product here, and it just seems like it's half-baked, and it seems like I can predict where your melodies are going to land before I'm even hearing the rest of the phrase. It just seems like it's kind of like a shopping list. I think that people would start being like, yeah, you know what, maybe I am not really all that I think that I am. Maybe I should go back to the drawing board and look inside myself and see what is drawing me to play music. But because we don't have that, because we have nonstop comment sections full of people up every band's ass for giving them the breakdown, giving them the chorus, giving them the fucking sweet bullshit, they're never going to hear that criticism. And if you don't hear criticism, you don't have the drive to improve, and you don't have the drive to look inside yourself and find ways to actually harness a message that you're trying to get across in music. So until we can find a way to actually be a little bit more critical of what we're listening to, there's not going to be any kind of reasoning for the younger bands of today to try to hone their craft. And as soon as they're able to record something, everyone's got their home studio, everyone can get their demo out, everyone can get their whole record out, from their couch, essentially, with their guitar plugins that all sound the same, and you end up having the modern metal music product that is just uniform. And because it's appealing to the masses, there's no reason to try to adapt it at all. And I really don't see us salvaging it unless we get more bands like Hammerhead that are, just the result of good parenting, which is still just kind of fashioning something you like into your kids and making them perform it. Which that's just my theory. I don't know how that came about, but they're an impressive young band. If you haven't heard them, they started when they were like 13, playing like that kind of really fast thrash stuff like Beneath the Remains, and I loved seeing it. I loved seeing the young kids doing that kind of metal, because you don't see it anymore. If young kids are playing metal, it's metalcore. That's just the way it is. And seeing people play like that kind of classic metal style, it was awesome to see it. But once again, I don't know where the motivation is, because if you're that young and you're playing that kind of stuff, which is essentially tribute music, it's tribute music the same way that if the young kids of today are playing tribute old school death metal, tribute thrash metal, tribute whatever, it's all the same kind of shit, where they're trying to harness their own take on a sound that has been established to give you that sense of nostalgia. But for the Hammerhead type of stuff, for that group of kids, it feels a lot more authentic. It feels like the riffs that they're coming up with, even though it's clearly influenced by older bands, it feels like they're unique. It feels like their arrangements are unique. And like I said, with what your Rivers of Nile type of like metalcore bullshit that it is, it all follows the same format. And I doubt you're going to hear a band like Hammerhead, which now currently has like 8-minute songs that have these sprawling arrangements that still kind of adhere to a sense of continuity. They're never going to come out and say this is bigger than whatever, or this is better than whatever. But if you were to interview any of these metalcore bands that are trying to step outside the box, they're going to tell you that what they're doing has so much more depth than what death metal and what extreme metal brings to the table. And that's what I think the disconnect is. And it's all going to be further supported by comment sections and fans and whatever. And it's going to be, it's never going to find a reason to change as long as that constant approval is there. So that's my thoughts on why modern youth can't seem to orchestrate good metal right now. I'd love to be proven wrong outside of what Hammerhead is doing. If you can think of any bands that are doing it well, please let me know. I'm still searching all the time for those new bands that can show me that they're inspired and have a message and have coherent songwriting. I would love to see it happen. So if you have any more examples, please let me know in the comments, and thank you for listening.